to look out. But I've had black friends that get followed around in Woolworths. People on WhatsApp groups. If you think of a neighborhood watch, I could walk around my neighborhood carrying a TV, and people would think I'm taking it from one house to another house, or I'm taking it from the car to my house. A black person walks around my neighborhood with a TV,
Stolen.
and the security will be.
And
yeah, that reminds me of the BM thing. I don't know if anyone, I suppose listeners definitely have seen this. I mean, I hear this in my work all the time, where on WhatsApp groups, neighborhood WhatsApp groups, people would say, BM spotted, be on the lookout. That's blackmail. And it's just like
oh wow,
completely
I didn't know
accepted that like that terminology is used. Yeah. And it's like not even a thing, right? So because we are so conditioned and we're also biased, we don't necessarily even realize that we've not only like, because we exist in the society, we all are unfortunately guilty of racism very often because of that historical context. So just to think about if privilege is dependent on race, of course not. It's not that simple. But again, if we think about the historical context in South Africa, we can't deny the fact that that's the immediate, that's the first thing that we see and that we ascribe value to. Of course, these things are nuanced. So I just want to reiterate again, it's important to understand that there's that intersectionality that we need to understand. So I'm not only a white person, I'm a female, I'm Afrikaans speaking, I'm a Christian, I'm a mother. There's all of these things that make you who you are, and all of those things give you either power or not, privilege or not, right? That's just the reality. So we have to understand that as human beings, we don't exist in silos. It is all intersectional, right? But what I like to do is, of course, I agree with what you said completely earlier, Brett, like it's about a range of different things, height, etc., etc. We can spend an hour talking about all the different things that make us different, that give us more or less privilege. But within this context, I like to narrow it down to 7 things. It's race, language, gender, sexuality, religion, income, and ability. It's obviously more than that, but if you can narrow down to those 7 things that legitimately gives you privilege or not, they're equally important, but they don't carry equal value in South Africa. Like I said earlier, I think race is still dominant, and then gender, and then we can rank it further. But those 7 things, I think, are all equally important, and we can't just dismiss them. But what we cannot do is say that, yeah, you're completely on my level, and like Brett said, you're just never going to be followed around in a shop, as an example. You can be the CEO of Standard Bank, as an example, and still be followed around and still be seen as dodgy if you're wearing a hoodie on a Saturday morning, even if you arrived in a Ferrari, because of what your body represents, right? So even though that person might like tick the box other identity markers, but so we can't deny that fact. But of course, we can't think about the CEO of Sanlam, as an example, as the same as a homeless person. So that's also just important to take into consideration.
No, absolutely. Lydia, thank you for that clarification. Now, in the conversation about privilege, there is a writer, an author, I would say a thought leader, Brené Brown, that says, and I just want to know if you, Lydia, or Brett, do you agree with the statement? What separates privilege from entitlement is gratitude. Do you agree with that? And why?
I feel like yes and no. I don't know about you, Brett, but I feel like yes and no, because sure, I'm not entitled if I'm grateful for my privilege, but what scares me about that statement or that way of thinking is that gives us an exit. I'm grateful, so therefore I'm not as bad at those entitled guys, so I'm better than. And as white people, we love doing that. We all love doing that. I'm guilty of that. We all love doing that. I feel like it's part of our DNA. You know, I'd like to, I want to differentiate myself from other white people because I secretly want to show that I'm better. So at least I'm not entitled because I've owned my privilege, right? That's something that you should do it anyway. You know what I mean? This is a Christian radio station. I'm assuming that a lot of people that are listening are Christian. It should also just be your driving force in life to want to own you know what I mean? So I don't know, like I get that. And I think gratitude is a very good first step. But if you stop there, it's not enough. And it also becomes a really great exit strategy from doing the hard work and continuously being honest with yourself. Because I really think when it comes to this question around privilege, it's never, ever going to go away. So if you want to, because you can't never, it can't disappear. But if you can, however, have a more healthy relationship with that privilege. right? And when you are treated unfairly in a positive way, and also other people are treated unfairly in a negative way, you can do something about it. You can use your power. But if I choose to ignore that because now I've been grateful, so I can just exit from the privilege conversation, then I'm part of the problem. You know what I mean? It's a daily choice that I need to make. So I feel like, sure, I need to be grateful every day, but I also can't stop there, because then I'm not really changing the status quo, then I'm just accepting it. That's,
I think a lot of times... No, you can go ahead, Brett. You can go ahead, Brett.
No, go for it, please.
No, I was just going to say, I think a lot of times it's maybe just not knowing, it's an uncomfortable space. I don't know what to do. Oh, I am grateful. But what does it look like if I recognize it? What is enough? I hear a lot of people of, a different race to me saying that what is enough? How do I know that I've done enough? What does it look like to recognize and to acknowledge my privilege? And what am I supposed to do with it? I think that maybe is something that we can also speak about during this conversation. What should one do with the privilege that they have?
Yeah, I feel like there's 4 hours wrapped up just in that question. But just going back to the quote quickly, I agree with a lot of what Lidia was saying. For me, it always gets scary, especially in Christian spaces where when we conflate something to a one-liner, because it does give us like a let-off. I think I would go, like, I'd lean in a little bit to say that entitlement is a huge barrier. And if we can work past that, especially all the stuff starts in the mirror, as Lidia said, like once I can deal with entitlement, then I'm a step closer to being in a good place, I think. So I would say, like, okay, we one step closer, but I think the idea of gratitude being the big difference. Yeah, we Christians like to hold on to a statement and create a whole religion around it, which is very dangerous. And I think this is work that, again, Lidia alluded to it. This is going to be work we're doing for the whole rest of our lives. It's not going to be like, when is enough? Like, it's not going to be enough. And especially speaking in the context of Christianity, which is where the station speaks to. We're told to love our neighbor as ourselves. Like, we'll never get that right. Like, what I often tell people when we're struggling with theology is, like, go to Jesus' greatest command. Do that. When you're finished with that, come back. He'll give you more to do, because that will keep us going our whole lives. And I think with privilege, just going to the recognition thing again, I think for me, I see kind of 3 steps to what do we do with this? How do we move on? And the first one is recognition. Most people can't see it and have all the defensiveness against, but I worked hard, or I was poor as well. And we can go into those kind of things. That doesn't affect the advantages, the unearned benefits that you get by just stepping into a place and by inhabiting your body, as Lidia pointed out. I really like that. Like, you can physically see certain stuff that just gives you advantage when you walk in the room. So the first one is recognize. Then I'd say acknowledge. It has to be spoken out loud. Like, I've got white privilege. And then for me, where the work happens is what I call leveraging, using your privilege. And because people often go like, oh, you want me to feel guilty, white guilt, all that kind of stuff, which I think is also just nonsense. Like, guilt rolls us into a ball, it condemns us, it makes us ineffective. Whereas if you take something like, I can't remember the other word, conviction is the other word I think of. Conviction feels like guilt often, but it moves us towards action. So how can I use the privileges? How can I use the advantages? So even at the beginning of the call, when I'm going like this, there's so much in that. I've never met Lidia before, so how can she expect to interpret my actions? But it's a sense of knowing that in a space like this, the white male gets to speak first. At any Q&A, after any meeting, the first 4 people that will speak will be white males, and most of them will not be asking questions because they just want to make statements and be heard. So what can I do to leverage when I'm on a conversation with a woman? I can hold back and let her have the mic first. And I can not talk as much as I'm talking now, so let me shut up.
So Lidia, it's over to you. Wow, Brett, thank you so much. That is indeed the change that we want to see, Lidia, isn't it so? Just being mindful.
So great, great. Yeah, that's so interesting. Like, I mean, I've done work with interesting Black and white males in the space around diversity and inclusion. And it's very interesting when you go facilitating in the space and I would ask a question and everyone would be very respectful in the space. But when they answer the question, they would make eye contact with the male always.
Wow.
It's the strangest thing. And when I call them out, they feel so embarrassed because they don't know that they're doing it. And I probably do the same thing when I'm on the other side. You know what I mean? So I'm not judging that. It's just so interesting when you see that happening because, again, we assume there's that authority there, even if the other person is leading the space, even if the woman is leading the space. It's like you submit to authority in a different way subconsciously when it's a male figure. So it's very interesting. Yeah, so that's why privilege cannot only be about race. You have to take everything in. I sound like a stuck record, but you have to take everything into consideration, the full picture. So you said over to me, but I feel like the conversation, what is the actual question that I'm answering now? Because I was trying to really just listen to what you were saying and agreeing to what Brett was saying, but I feel like the conversation is steered. So I just want to make sure.
I think now we can actually move on because of time, of course, to our next question, which is, what are some of the misconceptions that exist around privilege? The misconceptions. So maybe, Lidia, you can take that. Yeah.
There's so many, but the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that privilege is linked to a bank account. And again, I think this speaks to, I do something called white work with specifically white people around race matters primarily, and how we can own our privilege and take up responsibility. That's why like responsibility is the ability to respond, whereas shame and guilt disables us, right? But sometimes feeling that feeling is important to move through it and not to suppress it at the same time whilst trying to take responsibility. But anyway, so I think in those spaces, what I often hear, and even in spaces that are multiracial, which I think is actually very harmful when these kinds of comments are made, when someone says, well, privilege is simply linked to a bank account and I'm not necessarily rich. I come from a different socioeconomic background, so therefore I don't have privilege. Like, I get that it applies to other people, but it doesn't apply to me. And that is a very dangerous statement to make. I was someone that's guilty of making that statement very often, because I mean, in comparison to the rest of South Africans, I'm incredibly privileged from a socioeconomic background, but growing up, I always thought I wasn't, because my dad was a dominee in the NG Kerk. I mean, dominees don't make a lot of money. I had a student loan at university. I started working. I worked all through high school, university. I was always like, I don't know what you mean. And then when I actually started working and going into the real world, and I actually started seeing what it's about and find myself in this space and caring deeply about it, I realized how wrong I was. But I, again, had to have an embodied experience of putting myself in different spaces, which isn't as easy. I'm not better than anyone because I was in that space. I just happened to almost be lucky through my career, bringing me into spaces where I was able to actually be confronted with the extreme inequality in this country and understanding that it's so much deeper than a bank account. So for me, that's like the critical thing that we have to understand. And maybe I'm speaking to white people here, but we really have to understand that it's not as simple as a bank account. That's the main thing for me.
Absolutely. Brett, is there anything that you would like to add on that question, speaking about the misconceptions? You have mentioned a couple earlier on, but maybe there's something that also comes to mind that you just want to clarify as a misconception.
I think just adding to the point that Lidia made, because it's that thing of how, I mean, I do this work, Lidia does the work all the time, and yet we can find ourselves slipping into that thing. There's an amazing tool that I think UCT has called the wealth tool indicator or something, where you put in you answer a whole bunch of questions and it gives you where your percentage is in terms of wealth in the country. And most of the people that are watching this on a computer or phone are probably sitting in the top 3% of people in the country. That may not be true in terms of who has access to phones these days, but there's certain provisos. If you have a car, if you've got a laptop, if you have a toilet inside your house or whatever. I never, even though I know that stuff, even though I talk about that stuff, even though it's often a daily conversation with me, I never actively think or believe honestly that I'm in the top 3% of the country, even though I know it's true. Like, actively, I look at my mate who has a double-story house and a swimming pool and 2 cars, and I think, well, he's doing more, or he's better off than me, or Bergfleet is across the road. So I'm actually in the middle. That's what it feels like. I'm in the middle. But fortunately, the work I do now, I go into a lot of townships and I go into the Cape Flats a lot, and then you get the reality in your faces that the majority of South Africans are actually just living around the poverty line. And what's helpful, I think, maybe in overcoming privilege, is just being able to step into other places, finding reasons to do so, not in terms of like tourism, but actually having friends that live in different areas, just listening to lived experiences. Because once we start to see it and realize it, then we'll start to become a bit more sensitive to it, hopefully. And then we can start doing the work, which always has to start with ourselves, but then I think should also compel us to invite those people in our spaces to do the work as well.
Love that. I love that. Lydia, I'm going to come back to you in terms of, I think Brett has almost summed up our conversation, but just to sum it up even more, to talk into, okay, what can one do in the capacity where they are, in their workplace, in their university, in their home, how do I ensure that I recognize my privilege and do what I can do within the space I am in?
That question is a very important one,
yeah,
because
it's important, but I know that it could be long because I guess there are many ways.
Yeah. But the important thing here is to understand that when it comes to privilege and power is the same thing, right? So if it comes to power, the people with the power are the people with the responsibility, no one else.
Sure.
Right? So what I hear way too often, because we're having, like, let's just be frank, when I have this conversation with white people, they just want people of color to educate them. And no one says it as directly. And again, I was guilty. I am guilty. I'm part of the problem. I'm not better than anyone else. But we often rather want to be educated. We want to be told, please just tell me. It's part of your responsibility. With power comes responsibility. And what that means is not to want to hold on to the power. When power gets disrupted, everyone is uncomfortable, including people without privilege. So if you're looking at it from a race perspective or gender perspective, when power gets disrupted, from a male perspective, females are uncomfortable because we're all used to the status quo. We exist in the society and we've become comfortable with that, even if we are not benefiting from it, right? So your responsibility as the person with power is to disrupt that power and to not think that that makes you more important than anyone else. Because what happens often is, I'm just such a good white person. I'm going to allow my Black colleague to speak first in the meeting because I'm very woke and very aware, and I'm taking responsibility for my privilege. So I'm granting you this wonderful opportunity in my presence to speak first, as an example, right? Or I'm going to make sure that I speak up and make sure that we have a wheelchair ramp, as an example, which is all very good. But why am I doing that? Am I really doing that because I want to see the change? Or am I doing that because I want to be praised as a good person? It's really important to understand that difference. And I have an ego. My ego gets in the way all the time. And if you're the person with the most power, it's very easy for that to happen because we don't want to disrupt the status quo. We just want to seem like we're doing something. And again, maybe I'm being too harsh, but genuinely disrupting power relations is hard work. Genuinely allowing yourself for that to be an embodied experience as opposed to an intellectual one is different. And I like what you said earlier, Brett, around like it not being tourism. I think it's so easy. Like I've been in so many conversations now that I'm a mom as well, when people start talking about their nannies, and then all of a sudden we start speaking about Black people as if they're not people. But you know what? Oh, they're so wonderful. And then we feel good about ourselves because, we give them our old clothes and we do these things, which isn't, again, a bad thing. But again, like, is that my only exposure to people who don't look and sound and feel like me? Or what is the doorstep test? A friend of mine always says it's about the doorstep test. Like, who comes into your house? Who do you consider an equal? Who do you actually allow to sit at your table? Like, what does your doorstep test look like? Like, you can spend every weekend in a township, and that's great. But I think particularly from a church perspective, it's very important for us to understand, am I volunteering? That's what I like to call it. Like, am I going in and deciding on behalf of other people what they need and then leave feeling good and perhaps making an impact, but not really considering those people as my equal, really, because I'm still keeping the power relation in place. And what does my actual life look like? Now, I'm not saying at all you shouldn't be part of volunteer programs that make meaningful change, but I think that there's a lot of room for harm if we don't do that responsibly and if we don't do the personal work together with the community work. I think it's just very important for us, especially as Christians, to think about that. Absolutely. And I know I answered that question way too long, but it's a very, very deep one. And I can continue for an hour.
I think it definitely needed a deep comeback. And I loved when you used the word, disrupt. The responsibility is with you, the one with the power. And you're the one that the responsibility is on you to disrupt the power, and to ensure that you look out for the one that does not have power. It's not the responsibility of the one without the power. With that said, I think we're gonna wrap up from there. I don't know, Lidia, is there anything, last words, Brett, any last words that you want to maybe reiterate, or maybe if people are interested in having more of these discussions in your personal platforms, where can they reach you?
Yeah, let me just say one thing, and then I think it would be amazing for Lidia to share her platforms, because she's clearly doing the work, and clearly, yeah, I really been excited by just listening to her.
So cool.
But I think one thing I would say in terms of the work, and it really is, again, just repeating what Lidia said, but if I want to learn how to make a pasta, I go into Google and I find it and I can do it. And it's really that whole thing of just do the work yourself. Like, we don't need our friends of color to be educating us. When it is out there, there are books, there are articles, the work has been done, there are videos. Just go and do the work yourself, and then invite people in the space to do the work with you. I think that's so key in this stuff. But yeah, thank you for the conversation, Lidia. How do we find you?
Yes, how do we find you, sister?
Before I answer that question, final thing I just want to say for listeners to think about, and something that I really try to do myself as well, and I fail most of the time. But I think the thing that can guide us as not only white people, but when we hold the most power in a space, is to allow yourself to feel that difference.
Sure.
Don't just accept the difference. Because I think, for example, in South Africa, Black suffering has just been normalized to an incredible extent. So I see Black suffering every day. I'm not affected by it. If I allow myself to be affected by it, then the power, restructure won't be as uncomfortable. Like, allow yourself to see and feel what it is that you're seeing as a human first, before we start intellectualizing anything. And then where you can find me is, my company's name is called Bloom Enterprise, bloomenterprise.co.za. On my website, you can find me and you can fill in the contact sheet. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn under Bloom Enterprise. So please reach out. I'd love to work with whoever's listening, and as well as the two of you. Also just figuring it out day by day, but loving the journey.
Thank you, Lidia, so much. We appreciate that there are people that are doing the work out there, and inspiring others to do the work as well. So thank you so much to both Brett Fish Anderson and Lidia Rauch. I'm so sorry, Lidia, but for the pronunciation of your surname, but I'm trying.
No problem.
Thank you. Have yourself a blessed evening, and continue to do the work in the various spaces, and speak more about these things, especially on social media. I think that it helps, those people that are not able to speak about it openly like you two do, and that's why I thought, what, let me get these thought leaders in the space that are open, that are okay to speak about privilege. So thank you so much for making the show. Yeah, thank you. It's an honor and a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
God bless you both. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Right, family, there you have it. Lidia